The air was cold, sharp enough to sting her cheeks as she walked down the crowded streets. Her clothes were worn and torn, and her shoes had holes that let in the rain and the mud. She had been walking for hours, her stomach aching from emptiness. People passed by without noticing her. Some looked down, some looked away, and a few hurried past with busy faces, focused on their own lives. She had learned long ago that the world did not pause for someone like her. She had to fight for every small thing, a scrap of food, a few coins, a safe place to rest. She walked past cafes, restaurants, and shops that seemed like a different world. The lights inside were warm, golden, and inviting, a stark contrast to the gray and bitter cold outside. People sat inside, laughing and eating, their voices echoing through the windows. She pressed her face against the glass for a moment, watching them, wishing she could be part of that world, even just for a while. The smell of bread, roasted meat, and sweet desserts made her stomach grumble painfully. She had nothing to eat, nothing to drink, and nowhere to go tonight. As she wandered the street, her eyes fell on a beautiful restaurant with a grand piano sitting near the window. The polished wood shone under the warm lights. She had seen pianos before, in movies or on the streets, but this one looked perfect, almost magical. She remembered how her mother used to hum little tunes when she was a child, how she had secretly wished she could play music, even when everything around her felt hopeless. She didn't know much about playing, only little things she had learned by listening, but she knew she could make some kind of music. Maybe, just maybe, it could help her tonight. Her hands were cold, and she rubbed them together nervously. She took a deep breath and stepped closer to the window. She peered inside. The restaurant was full of people, all well-dressed and enjoying their meals. She felt tiny, almost invisible, like a shadow on the edge of their world. But then, a thought came to her. She had nothing to lose. If she could play, even for just a minute, maybe someone would notice. Maybe she could earn a small meal. Maybe this night would be different. Summoning all her courage, she pushed the door open. It was heavy, and the warm air inside hit her like a wave. The smell of food, clean polished tables, and faint perfume made her dizzy. All eyes turned toward her, a few with curiosity, most with suspicion. She could feel them judging her before she even said a word. Her heart pounded, but she took one step forward and spoke as clearly as she could. "Please, may I play the piano?" she asked, her voice trembling slightly. I am hungry. I can play for some food, just for a little bit." There was a pause. The waiter looked down at her with raised eyebrows. Some of the guests chuckled quietly, thinking it was a joke. Who would let a street girl just play in a restaurant like this? But something in her eyes, in her voice, was different. It was not just begging. There was a quiet honesty, a mix of fear and hope, that made people pause. The waiter sighed and looked at her again. She did not seem dangerous or rude. She seemed small, tired, and real. He whispered something to another staff member, and they shrugged. After a moment, he said, "Fine, you can play. Just to make it quick." Her face lit up. She nodded eagerly, almost tripping over her shoes as she hurried to the piano. The guests watched her with a mix of amusement and skepticism. Some whispered to each other, making small bets. "She can't even play a tune," one said quietly. "This will be over in a minute," said another. She heard nothing of it. All she could feel was the cold turning into warmth around her chest. She had a chance, a real chance. She walked to the piano and looked at the keys. They were shiny and perfect. Her hands hovered above them, unsure, but not afraid. She took a deep breath and remembered the little tunes she had hummed as a child, the songs her mother had once taught her. Slowly, she pressed a key. The note rang out, small but clear. Then another, and another. At first, it was shaky, almost too quiet. The guests leaned back, some frowning, some still smirking. But then, something changed. She found a rhythm, a flow that came naturally. Her fingers moved with a delicate confidence, touching the keys as if they were a part of her own body. The sound grew richer, warmer, filling the room in a way that made people stop talking. Some shifted in their chairs, listening more closely. Her eyes were closed now. She was not playing for them anymore. She was playing for herself, for the music that had always lived inside her, hidden and waiting. Each note carried her hunger, her struggle, her dreams, and the small hope that tonight could be different. The room became quieter. Even the clinking of cutlery seemed to pause. She could hear her own heartbeat in the music, fast at first, then steady as she lost herself in the sound. The guests began to notice something unusual. The girl's music was not just simple notes. It had feeling, expression, and a story. It spoke of hardship, of resilience, of something pure and honest. Some guests shifted in their chairs, leaning closer. Some stopped their conversations entirely. The waiter who had let her play felt a strange lump in his throat, his usual disbelief replaced with awe. This small, fragile girl was making the piano speak in a way no one expected. For a moment, she forgot where she was. She forgot the cold streets, the empty stomach, the doubts of others. All that existed was the music. Her fingers moved faster now, weaving a melody that was delicate yet powerful, simple yet full of emotion. She did not notice the tears forming in some eyes. She did not notice the quiet silence that had fallen over the restaurant. She was no longer a street girl asking for food. She was a musician, telling a story through sound that no words could match. The first few minutes passed like a heartbeat. People watched, some holding their breath, unable to look away. The once laughing patrons were now silent, captivated by the transformation before them. The girl's music had taken over the room, not by skill alone, but by the honesty and depth it carried. It was not perfect, not polished, but it was real. And reality has a way of touching people deeper than perfection ever could. And through it all, she did not play for applause. She played for survival, yes, but also for the sheer need to be seen, to be heard, to matter even for just a few minutes. Each note was a plea, a story, a heartbeat of someone who had lived through hunger, cold, and doubt, and yet still found beauty in the world. By the time she paused to take a breath, the restaurant had changed. There was no laughter, no whispers of ridicule, only attentive silence. People exchanged glances, shocked at what they had just witnessed. Even the staff, who had seen countless performers, seemed stunned. They had expected a street girl, nervous and unskilled, not a storyteller whose fingers spoke directly to the heart. For the first time that day, she felt warmth that had nothing to do with the restaurant's heater or the food she had not yet received. She felt seen. She felt respected. She felt a small spark of hope that maybe, just maybe, the world had room for her dreams. And as she prepared to continue, she knew that the next few minutes could change everything, not just for her, but for everyone who had taken the time to listen. Her story had begun, and the piano was her voice. The restaurant was silent now, the kind of silence that filled every corner and seemed to weigh on the air. The girl's hands hovered over the keys, taking a moment to breathe. She could feel every pair of eyes in the room on her, and instead of fear, a strange confidence began to grow. She had come this far, and somehow, the music inside her had been heard. That tiny spark of belief made her heart beat faster, not with fear, but with hope. The waiter who had allowed her to play stepped back slightly, watching her with a mixture of curiosity and astonishment. He had seen performers before, musicians who practiced for years, yet this girl, ragged and thin, was producing something that felt alive, something that made people pause and listen with their hearts. He glanced at the other staff, and they all exchanged quiet looks, as if silently agreeing. This was not ordinary. A few of the guests whispered among themselves. She can play," one asked, almost in disbelief. "I thought it would be a disaster," another whispered, but the words sounded small in the stillness of the restaurant. Each note that followed carried more emotion than any conversation could. The girl's fingers moved carefully, finding melodies that were soft and gentle at first, then gradually more expressive. She wasn't thinking about impressing anyone. She was simply letting the music flow. The melody changed now. It became deeper, richer, as if she was telling the story of every day she had survived on the streets. Every hungry morning, every cold night, every time someone had turned away without seeing her. The music spoke of longing and pain, but also of resilience. It had a quiet strength that made people sit straighter, lean forward, and listen more closely. Even the guests who had been smirking just moments ago were now silent, their eyes fixed on her as if she held a secret they needed to hear. She could feel the weight of the room. The laughter had faded, replaced by something heavier, something honest. It was not just the notes, it was the truth behind them. People could feel her struggle, her life, through the music, and that was more powerful than any words could ever be. She remembered the nights when hunger had gnawed at her stomach, when she had hidden from rain and snow, when she had wished for a moment of warmth. All those moments poured into her hands, into the sound that filled the restaurant. Some guests tried to hide their emotions. A woman dabbed at her eyes with a napkin, pretending not to cry. A man shifted uncomfortably, but his hands shook slightly as he held his fork. Even the staff seemed affected, though none of them admitted it out loud. The girl didn't notice any of this. She was lost in the music, in the story that her life had become. Each note was an expression of her soul, a reflection of everything she had been through and everything she still hoped for. A small child, sitting at a table with her parents, pressed her face to the glass of the piano, wide-eyed. She didn't fully understand the music, but she felt its power. Her tiny hands rested on the table, and she leaned forward, completely captivated. The girl at the piano noticed the child's gaze, and a soft smile appeared on her lips. Though she didn't stop playing, it was as if she had found a listener who believed in her, who had no judgment, no doubt. The music began to flow more freely now. She allowed herself to take small risks, pressing keys she hadn't used before, experimenting with rhythms she hadn't tried in months. It was daring, raw, and beautiful. She had learned to survive with little, but she had never truly played like this in front of anyone. The restaurant became a stage, not for show, but for truth. Each note was alive, resonating with every person in the room. The guests started leaning in, their skepticism replaced by awe. Some held their breath as they listened to the twists and turns of her melody. The girl's hands were small, but they moved with purpose, creating a harmony that filled the space completely. Even the sounds of cutlery, the quiet whispers, and the shifting of chairs seemed to pause in respect. There was no way to ignore the music, no way to dismiss it. It demanded attention, and everyone in the room gave it willingly. One man, sitting near the back, wiped his eyes quickly. He had come to the restaurant expecting a quiet dinner, maybe some light entertainment, but instead, he found himself listening to something that felt sacred. He looked around and noticed that everyone else was equally affected. The laughter, the casual talking, even the clinking of glasses had stopped. In its place was something extraordinary, a moment where strangers were connected through a girl, and her piano. The girl's confidence grew with each passing moment. The initial fear that had gripped her chest melted away. She had been nervous, yes, but now the music carried her forward. She remembered every little lesson she had learned on the streets, observing, listening, surviving, and somehow, those lessons had prepared her for this moment. Each note was deliberate, yet natural, and it seemed to carry a story of survival and hope. As she continued, she began to notice the small details around her. The way the candlelight flickered on the polished wood of the piano, the way the restaurant's chandelier reflected tiny rainbows on the ceiling, the way the guests' faces softened as they listened. These little things, which might have seemed ordinary to anyone else, gave her energy. She realized that even in a place she had once thought was unreachable, beauty existed, and for a few moments, she was a part of it. The music began to swell, and the girl allowed herself to be completely expressive. The melody rose and fell, like waves in a stormy sea, carrying everything she had felt in the past: fear, hunger, loneliness, but also hope, courage, and determination. She had never played like this before, and yet it felt natural. She was no longer just a girl playing for food. She was a storyteller, a messenger, a voice for every person who had ever been overlooked or underestimated. Some guests were openly moved now. Tears rolled down the cheeks of a few, and even the staff who had been trained to stay composed found themselves unable to look away. The girl's music spoke a language beyond words. It bypassed logic and reason, touching something deeper in everyone who listened. The restaurant, usually filled with casual chatter, now existed as a small world where only the music mattered. As the melody reached its peak, a hush settled over the room. The girl's hands moved faster, more confidently, more passionately. She could feel the energy in the room, the way it vibrated through the floor, the tables, and the people themselves. It was as if the restaurant had become alive, responding to the story she told with her music. Every note carried emotion, every pause carried meaning. And then, as if the moment itself had been waiting for her, she played a note so soft, so delicate, that the entire room leaned in involuntarily. It was a quiet plea, a whisper of hope, and it resonated with everyone. People held their breath, afraid to break the spell. The girl's music had transformed the restaurant. It was no longer just a place to eat. It had become a place of connection, a place where the struggles of one could be felt by all. By now, the guests had stopped thinking about the girl as a street child or a beggar. They saw her as an artist, a storyteller, a human being who could convey feelings through something as simple, yet profound, as a piano. The music had erased social barriers, replacing them with understanding and empathy. Everyone in the room was united in that moment, bound by something far greater than themselves. The girl finally paused for a breath. Her chest rose and fell, and she looked around at the faces that were no longer smirking, no longer doubtful. She saw wonder, respect, and something else, admiration. For the first time, she felt seen, not for her poverty, not for her clothes, not for her hunger, but for who she was and what she could create. And in that silence, in that fleeting moment, she realized something important. Music was not just notes on a page. It was her voice, her power, her way to survive and thrive in a world that often ignored people like her. It was a gift she had carried all along, waiting for someone to give her the chance to share it. And tonight, she had that chance. The waiter approached quietly, holding a small plate of food. He didn't say much, just nodded. The gesture, small as it was, felt enormous. The girl's eyes lit up, not just for the food, but for the recognition. Someone had acknowledged her, believed in her, and that small act meant more than any meal could. She nodded gratefully, then returned her hands to the piano, ready to continue. The music continued, but now with a new energy. The girl played with joy, with freedom, and with the knowledge that she was capable of more than survival. She could create beauty, move hearts, and touch lives, even in the most unexpected places. And in that restaurant, on that cold night, she began to see a future that was no longer only about hunger and struggle, but also about hope, opportunity, and the magic that could come from a single brave moment. The girl's hands hovered over the piano keys, feeling the warmth of the polished wood beneath her fingers. The restaurant had grown still again, the kind of quiet that seems to pause time itself. Even the staff, who had been busy serving dishes and cleaning tables just moments before, now watched her with awe. They didn't need to say anything. The music spoke louder than words ever could. She took a deep breath and let her fingers move, each key pressed with care, each note carrying more emotion than the last. Her music was no longer just a melody. It had become a story of hunger, of cold nights, of endless days filled with struggle, but also of hope, courage, and determination. She played not to impress, not to entertain, but because the music had become a part of her. As she continued, the room seemed to change. The once bright, polished restaurant felt softer somehow, warmer, almost alive. The guests leaned in, their eyes wide, their faces slowly losing the skepticism they had first carried. A few of them whispered quietly, unable to resist sharing their wonder. "How can someone play like that?" One said softly. "I've never heard anything like this," said another. The words felt small against the power of the music filling the room. Her hands began moving faster now, gliding across the keys with a confidence she hadn't known she possessed. Each note rose and fell, carrying the story of her life, the hunger, the loneliness, the moments of fear, but also the moments of quiet joy she had found in little things. A warm cup of tea someone had given her once, the sound of children laughing on the streets, the small kindnesses that reminded her the world wasn't entirely cruel. The girl felt something she had never felt before, a connection. She wasn't playing alone. The music had reached the hearts of everyone in the restaurant. She could see it in their eyes. Some had tears glistening. Others had their hands clasped tightly as if trying to hold on to the moment. Even the usually composed waiters and servers had stopped moving, their eyes fixed on her, caught by the raw honesty in every note. A man sitting near the corner of the restaurant, a man who had been quietly judging her at first, now leaned forward in his chair. He had thought this girl would be clumsy, awkward, or hopeless. But what she was creating with her music was impossible to ignore. It wasn't just skill, it was heart. It was the story of someone who had lived a life full of challenges, but refused to let them define her. He could feel the emotion in the music, in every pause, in every rise and fall of the melody. The girl closed her eyes for a moment, letting herself feel every emotion she had bottled up for years. She remembered nights when she had curled up under a thin blanket on the cold streets, listening to the wind howl and wishing she could be somewhere safe, somewhere warm, somewhere she could matter. All those feelings poured into her hands, and the piano transformed them into something beautiful. A young woman at a nearby table rested her hand on her chest, unable to stop the tears flowing. She had come to the restaurant for a quiet dinner, never expecting to be moved so deeply by a stranger. The girl at the piano had made the room silent, but in that silence, every heart was speaking. Everyone could feel what she had felt, even if just for a moment. The music changed again. It softened, delicate and tender, like a whisper of hope. It was the part of the story she had always carried in secret, that even in the darkest moments, she had dreams, she had faith, she had a desire to be seen for who she really was. The notes lingered in the air, gentle and persistent, and the guests found themselves leaning in, almost afraid to breathe, afraid to break the spell. Even the child who had been watching earlier from the edge of the restaurant was mesmerized. Her tiny hands rested on the edge of the table, eyes wide, completely absorbed. She didn't fully understand the music, but she felt it. She understood that something important was happening. She looked at the girl as if she were a magician, someone who had the power to change the world with her hands. The girl's confidence grew with every passing moment. She had started this night simply hoping for a meal, a small act of kindness, but now she realized something extraordinary. Her music could move people, touch them in ways she had never imagined. She wasn't just a girl asking for food anymore. She was a storyteller, a messenger, someone whose voice mattered. And for the first time, she felt it truly mattered. Her fingers danced across the keys, faster now, weaving layers of sound that were both gentle and powerful. The restaurant felt like it had disappeared, leaving only her and the music. Every note she played told a story, every pause held meaning. The guests felt her emotions as if they were their own, and the weight of their attention gave her strength. She was no longer afraid. She was alive. The music reached a crescendo, strong and full, like a wave crashing against rocks. The girl didn't hold back. She let every emotion, every feeling, flow through her fingers and into the room. Some guests gasped softly, others held their breath, unable to do anything but watch and listen. It was impossible to look away. The music demanded attention, respect, and they gave it willingly. She glanced briefly at the waiter who had allowed her to play. He was standing silently, holding a tray in his hands, completely captivated. He had expected a moment of entertainment at best, but now he realized he had witnessed something rare, something that would stay with him long after the night ended. He gave her a small, encouraging nod, and she smiled, feeling a quiet sense of validation. Her mind wandered briefly to her past, to the streets she had wandered, the nights she had spent alone, the hunger she had felt. All those memories, all those struggles, had brought her here. And in this room, filled with strangers, she was finally able to express them, to release them, to transform them into something beautiful. Music had become her voice, her way of speaking when words were not enough. The notes softened again, a gentle lull after the powerful wave of emotion she had created. The guests exhaled collectively, some leaning back in their chairs, some closing their eyes to fully absorb what they had heard. It was as if the world had paused, allowing this girl and her piano to take center stage. Even the clinking of dishes, the hum of conversation, the shuffle of footsteps, all seemed distant and unimportant compared to the music. A middle-aged woman at a table rested her head on her hand, tears quietly running down her cheeks. She had seen performers before, musicians who had been trained and polished, but none had moved her like this girl had. There was something raw, honest, and real about the way she played. It was not perfection, but it was truth. And truth has a way of touching the heart deeper than any technical skill ever could. The girl noticed the subtle changes around her, the softened faces, the quiet tears, the people leaning in closer. Each gesture reinforced what she already knew. This music was more than just a performance. It was connection, understanding, and empathy all wrapped into one. She felt a warmth spread through her chest, a feeling of acceptance she had rarely experienced in her life. Her hands never slowed. They continued to move, flowing effortlessly across the keys. She added small flourishes, little embellishments that made the melody richer, deeper. It was as if the piano itself had become a part of her, responding to every thought, every emotion, every memory. The restaurant became a sanctuary, a space where hearts could speak without words, where strangers could feel together. A young man who had been skeptical from the start now sat quietly, mesmerized. He had come expecting a simple dinner, maybe some light entertainment. And yet he had witnessed something extraordinary. The girl's music had captured not just his ears, but his heart. He felt the story she was telling, the struggles she had endured, the hope she still carried. And in that moment, he understood that greatness is not always measured by appearances, wealth, or status, but by courage, talent, and honesty. The girl's melody shifted again, a softer, more intimate passage. She closed her eyes fully this time, letting the music guide her completely. She imagined the streets she had known, the nights she had spent cold and alone, and she let every feeling pour into her fingers. Hunger, fear, hope, dreams, and courage all became notes, blending together into a story that only she could tell. The guests were captivated. Some sat silently, holding back tears. Some whispered quietly to each other, amazed at what they were hearing. The staff exchanged glances, silently acknowledging the magic unfolding before them. And the girl, unaware of the effect she had, continued to play, driven only by the music inside her. The crescendo returned, stronger and more powerful than before. The girl leaned into the keys, her fingers moving faster, more passionately. The restaurant was alive with the sound, every note resonating in every corner. The guests were no longer observers. They were participants in her story, feeling every emotion, every struggle, every hope. And for the first time, the girl realized something important. Her music had the power to touch hearts, to inspire, to heal. She paused for a moment, taking a deep breath, and looked around. The faces she saw were no longer judgmental or skeptical. They were open, filled with wonder, respect, and admiration. For the first time, she felt truly seen, not as a street girl, not as someone who begged for food, but as a human being, capable of beauty, capable of touching lives, capable of greatness. The girl's hands moved over the piano keys, almost without thinking now. She was no longer just playing notes. She was telling a story that filled the entire restaurant. The music was alive, full of energy, full of emotion. Each key she pressed carried everything she had experienced in her life. The cold nights, the empty stomachs, the loneliness, and the small joys she had clung to in the shadows. Every sound seemed to pulse with meaning, and the room had transformed completely. The guests had stopped eating entirely. Forks hovered in midair, knives paused, and even the faint hum of conversation had vanished. The music was too powerful to ignore. Eyes widened, breaths slowed, and hearts seemed to beat in sync with her melody. Some leaned forward, resting their elbows on the table, their faces full of awe. Others pressed their hands to their mouths, unsure how to contain the wave of emotions washing over them. Every single person in the room was caught in the moment, unable to turn away. Her fingers danced faster now, moving with a confidence and skill that seemed almost impossible for someone who had never had proper training. The melody rose and fell like waves in a stormy sea, gentle at times, powerful at others. It was a perfect mixture of sadness and hope, fear and courage, despair and joy. The music carried the story of her life, and everyone could feel it in their bones. A woman sitting near the back wiped her tears discreetly with a napkin, trying not to draw attention, but the emotion was too strong to hide. She had come to the restaurant for a quiet evening, never expecting to be moved so deeply. The girl's music spoke to something everyone had felt at some point: the fear of being overlooked, the hope of being seen, the courage to survive even when life seemed impossible. The child who had been watching earlier pressed her small hands against the table, completely mesmerized. She couldn't understand everything, but she could feel it. The music made her heart feel big and light all at once, as if it were trying to tell her something important about the world. The girl noticed the child's gaze and gave a soft smile, a quiet acknowledgement. Though she did not stop playing, it was as if she knew that this little listener was sharing the moment with her, even without words. The melody grew more complex now, intertwining high and low notes in a dance that seemed effortless. She was fully in control, but it was also as if the music had taken on a life of its own. The room was completely silent, except for the sound of the piano. Even the staff had stopped moving. The waiter who had allowed her to play stood near the side, holding a tray he no longer needed. Captivated by what he was witnessing, he could feel the emotion in every note, in every pause, and he knew that this moment was extraordinary. A man sitting near the window leaned back in his chair, trying to take it all in. He had come expecting a normal evening, maybe a small meal and some light entertainment, but instead, he found himself moved to tears by a stranger he had never met. The girl's music had reached him in a way that words never could. It wasn't just the melody, it was the honesty behind it, the life she had poured into every note. He felt a strange connection to her, as if he understood her struggles and hopes even though he had never lived her life. Her hands flew across the keys, fast and precise, yet full of emotion. She had reached a point where she didn't even need to think about the next note. It came naturally. The music flowed from her heart, through her fingers, and into the room, wrapping around every person present. The restaurant no longer felt like a place to eat. It had become a sanctuary, a space where everyone could feel something powerful together. The melody shifted again, softer now, almost whispering. She slowed her pace, letting each note linger, carrying emotion in a way that made people hold their breath. It was as if she were speaking directly to every soul in the room, telling them that even in the darkest times, hope can survive. The guests were spellbound, caught between the power of the music and the emotions it stirred within them. Some pressed their hands to their chests, trying to steady their hearts, while others simply closed their eyes and let themselves feel. She felt the energy in the room, the way the music resonated with every person. It was more than she had ever imagined. She had started this evening hoping for a small meal, a moment of kindness, and now she realized that her music could move people in ways she never thought possible. She could touch hearts, inspire feelings, and connect with others through something as simple as a piano. The crescendo returned, stronger and more powerful than before. Her fingers moved faster, yet every note was deliberate, precise, and full of intention. The music built, wave after wave, carrying every ounce of emotion she had. It was the story of her life, hardship, hunger, loneliness, and also the story of her resilience, her courage, and the spark of hope she had always carried within her. Tears began to flow openly among the guests now. A woman near the front quietly dabbed at her cheeks, unable to contain the emotion. A man near the corner rested his head on his hand, silently moved. Even the staff, trained to remain professional and composed, could not hide the effect the music had on them. They watched in awe as the girl, small and fragile as she looked, transformed the entire room with her talent and her heart. The child sitting nearby now pressed both hands to her face, her eyes wide in amazement. She had never seen anything like this. She felt a mixture of awe, joy, and wonder. The girl at the piano seemed larger than life in that moment. A hero not because she was powerful or wealthy, but because she had the courage to share her gift, to be herself, and to touch the hearts of everyone around her. The girl's music became softer again, gentle and intimate, as if she were telling a secret to each listener personally. Every note carried a weight of honesty, a truth that could not be ignored. People leaned in closer, wanting to catch every sound, every feeling, every unspoken story. The room had become a world apart, a space where only the music existed, where only the moment mattered. She glanced briefly at the waiter who had allowed her to play. He was standing silently, holding a small tray, completely captivated. She smiled softly at him, a quiet gesture of gratitude. He had given her the chance to play, not knowing what would happen, and now he was witnessing something extraordinary. It was a reminder that small acts of kindness could lead to moments of magic, moments that could change lives forever. The music rose to its final peak, powerful and full of emotion. She pressed the keys with energy, passion, and determination. Every note seemed to echo in the hearts of the listeners, carrying her story and her spirit. The restaurant was alive with the sound, and the guests were part of it, feeling every high, every low, every twist and turn of the melody. Then, with a final, soft note, she let her hands rest gently on the keys. The sound lingered in the air for a moment, as if the room itself were holding its breath. Silence followed, deep and reverent. It was the kind of silence that makes you realize something extraordinary has just happened. Everyone in the restaurant remained still, too moved to speak, too awed to react. The girl slowly lifted her head, looking around the room. She saw tears, smiles, and expressions of pure admiration on the faces of the guests. Even the staff looked at her with newfound respect. In that moment, she felt a warmth that had nothing to do with food or clothing. She felt seen. She felt valued. She felt powerful in a way she had never experienced before. A small plate of food was quietly placed before her by the waiter. She nodded in thanks but didn't reach for it immediately. Her eyes scanned the room, taking in the faces of everyone who had listened, everyone who had shared this moment with her. She had started this evening hoping for something small, and she ended it with something far greater: connection, recognition, and the knowledge that her life, her story, and her music mattered. The guests began to clap, softly at first, then louder as they realized the depth of what they had just witnessed. Some stood, giving her a standing ovation. Others wiped their tears, still amazed at what had happened. The girl smiled shyly, a small, humble gesture, knowing she had touched the hearts of everyone in the room, even if only for a moment. She took a deep breath and allowed herself to feel the joy and relief that had been building inside her. For the first time in a long while, she felt safe, valued, and appreciated. The music had not just told her story, it had changed the way the world saw her, if only for a few moments. And in that change, she found hope for the future. The room slowly returned to its usual rhythm. Conversations began, softly at first, then more freely. The guests shared glances, smiles, and whispers, still processing the beauty they had witnessed. The girl at the piano quietly continued to sit, her hands resting on the keys, feeling a calm satisfaction. She had played, she had shared, and she had made a difference. In the quiet that followed, she realized something important. Music was not just entertainment. It was power. It was connection. It was a voice for those who might otherwise go unheard. And tonight, she had found her voice, and the world had listened. The applause continued long after the last note had faded. The girl sat at the piano, her hands resting lightly on the keys, feeling the weight of what had just happened. She had started the evening hoping for a simple meal, a few moments of kindness, and instead, she had shared a part of herself so deeply that the entire restaurant had been transformed. She looked around, noticing faces filled with wonder, admiration, and something that felt almost like reverence. The waiter approached, holding a small plate of food. "Here," he said softly. I didn't expect that." That was incredible. The girl's eyes met his, and she smiled faintly, a mixture of gratitude and disbelief. For so long, she had been invisible to the world, overlooked and underestimated. And now, people had not just noticed her. They had listened, truly listened, and felt her story through the music. Some guests had stood from their chairs, clapping, cheering, and wiping tears from their eyes. A few approached her quietly, offering kind words and encouragement. "That was beautiful," one said softly, voice shaking with emotion. "I've never heard anything like it." Another reached out her hand in support, smiling. "You have a gift. Don't ever let anyone tell you otherwise." The girl nodded, her heart swelling in ways she had never imagined. These were strangers, people she had never met, and yet they recognized her worth, her talent, her humanity. The child who had been watching from the edge of the restaurant earlier ran forward now, her eyes shining. She held out a small toy she had been carrying. "For you," she said simply. The girl knelt down, gently taking the gift. She smiled, touched by the gesture, and whispered, "Thank you." It was a small act, yet it felt enormous. It reminded her that the world was not entirely cruel, that kindness could come from unexpected places, and that even the smallest connection could make a difference. The music had changed something in the room, in the people who had listened, and in herself. She realized that she no longer felt like a street girl invisible to the world. She felt like someone who mattered, someone who could touch hearts, someone whose voice through the piano could reach people in ways words never could. The applause continued, but it was not just for her skill. It was for her courage, her honesty, and the raw beauty she had shared. A man who had been sitting quietly near the back approached carefully. He held out a small envelope. "I don't know your story," he said, "but I know talent when I see it. Please, take this. It's a start. Maybe it can help you continue your music." The girl looked at him, astonished. She had never expected anything like this. She hesitated, then accepted it with both hands, feeling tears prick at the corners of her eyes. For the first time, she felt that her life could change, that there might be a future where she didn't have to beg for food, where she could create, perform, and be seen for who she truly was. The restaurant seemed brighter now, not just because of the lights or the polished surfaces, but because of the energy that lingered in the room. People spoke in hushed tones, sharing what they had felt, expressing their amazement, and quietly acknowledging the magic that had just unfolded. The girl watched them, her heart full. She had not only played for survival, she had played for expression, for connection, and in doing so, she had changed the room. She looked down at the piano, her fingers brushing the keys lightly. She could feel the music still lingering in her veins, still alive in her hands. It had been more than performance. It had been release, affirmation, and hope. She had shared a piece of her soul with people who had initially doubted her, and they had received it with open hearts. That realization brought her a warmth she had never known before. The guests began to leave slowly, but many approached to speak one final time. Some offered smiles, some hugs, some words of encouragement. "You have a gift," one said. "Don't waste it. The world needs your music." Another added, "Remember tonight. Remember that you can make people feel, even strangers, even without words." The girl nodded, feeling the weight of every word. These people had seen her, valued her, and believed in her, and that was more powerful than any money or food could provide. The waiter came forward again. "I know this doesn't solve everything," he said quietly, "but we want you to have this." He handed her a small bag of food. The girl accepted it, but her mind was elsewhere. She realized that what mattered most wasn't the meal, but the recognition, the connection, the proof that she could create beauty that others could feel. The food would satisfy her hunger, yes, but the music had satisfied her soul. She stood up slowly, feeling taller, stronger. For the first time in a long while, she felt like she belonged somewhere, even if just for a moment. The restaurant had become more than a place to eat. It had become a stage where she had been seen and heard. She could still feel the eyes of the guests, the lingering energy of their admiration, and she knew that she had made an impact, not just on them, but on herself. The envelope in her hands felt heavier now, full of possibilities. She didn't know exactly what the future held, but she knew that her life could be different. The music she had carried all along, hidden and waiting, had found its voice. And with that voice, she could change more than just a single night. She could change her story entirely. She paused near the piano, letting her eyes sweep across the emptying restaurant one last time. She saw the remnants of awe and inspiration on the faces of the staff and the guests. She could feel their gratitude, their astonishment, their recognition, and for the first time, she allowed herself to believe that she was capable, that she mattered, that her music had value far beyond a single evening or a single meal. The little child waved shyly as she left. The girl waved back, smiling softly. In that small gesture, she felt a connection that transcended words, a moment that reminded her that kindness and recognition could come from the most unexpected places. She took a deep breath, savoring the moment, the first taste of hope she had felt in years. The girl finally stepped outside, the cold night air greeting her, but it no longer felt harsh. She felt alive, invigorated, and full of possibility. The world that had once seemed cold and unkind now held potential. She could face the streets again, yes, but now she carried something different: belief in herself, the knowledge that her talent mattered, and the experience of touching hearts in a way she had never imagined. As she walked away, the sounds of the restaurant fading behind her, she thought about the future. She had survived by begging, by hiding, by being unseen. But now she had a new path. Her music could carry her forward. She could find people who believed in her, who could help her grow, who could help her reach places she had never dreamed of. The night had changed her, given her not just hope, but direction. She paused for a moment, looking at the stars above, faintly visible through the city lights. The world was vast, uncertain, and challenging, but it was also full of possibility. She realized that her life was not defined by hunger or cold or the streets. It was defined by her courage, her talent, and her willingness to take a risk, to ask for a chance, and to share herself with others. The girl began walking toward the small shelter she called home. But this time, her steps were lighter. Her heart felt full, not just from the food she had received, but from the recognition and love she had felt from people she had never known. She carried something far more valuable than survival. She carried hope, belief, and the knowledge that she could make a difference in the world through her music. That night, for the first time in a long while, she allowed herself to dream. She dreamed of stages, of pianos, of people listening and feeling the stories she could tell through her music. She dreamed of a life where hunger did not define her, where she could create, perform, and inspire. She dreamed of a world that could see her, really see her, and believe in her. And as she settled into the small, quiet space she called home, she smiled to herself. She had started the night with nothing but a hunger for food and a small hope. She ended it with something far greater: belief in herself, recognition from the world, and the realization that her life, her story, and her music could change everything. The night was quiet, but in her heart, it was alive with possibilities. The girl had played, had shared, had been seen, and the world had listened. And from that night onward, she knew one thing clearly: her music was her voice, her gift, and her path to a brighter future.